Kevin Martin here, your UT admissions guide. In this workshop, I've recreated and reproduced with permission a real UT Austin student application, and I want to walk you through what an admissions reviewer might be thinking as they're reading and trying to assess which admissions score to assign this applicant. We'll look at the essays and the resume and discuss the results at the end. I hope you enjoy this video.
Welcome to this UT Austin application review, where I have recreated and reproduced a real student application with their permission, whose name I've anonymized, and walk you through what an admissions reviewer may be perceiving as they are assessing and attempting to score this Macomb School of Business applicant on a scale of 1 to 6, 6 being the highest. And so let's take a look at their biographical information. So Christopher goes to a large suburban public school, middle to high income. There's no signs here of adversity. They're from a college-educated family and a upper middle income family income as well. One notable point is that there seem to be mixed race, Asian and white. So we'll see if the student chooses to talk about their identity and background a little bit more in the essays. So they've applied for Macomb's first choice, and they have also applied for business honors. So we'll also look at their business honors essay. Academically, they're doing extremely well. They've scored perfect on the math subsection of the SAT and a 1510 overall, ranking in the top 2% of their class. So their academic profile is within the middle 50% range for the typical admit to business honors. And so this applicant will certainly be competitive, and with essentially any applicant to business honors, perfect academics, even if they're number one in the class of the 1600, more or less never guarantees admission. So honors admission, or even for selective programs at the university, the essays and resume are really going to be what puts the student over the top. Okay, so let's look first at their resume. So I've reproduced their expanded resume. Okay, so they've got a few different business organizations here. So when reviewers are looking for their fit for major, we see BPA, a few different stock and statistics clubs, programming as well, and they've got some leadership positions here. And it looks like they founded their statistics club and had a March Madness bracket, so that's pretty cool. We also see a few state level achievements for BPA, so that's also something that's impressive in terms of demonstrating their fit for major, and also a commitment to an activity over a longer period of time, because presumably there's training involved for ranking that high in a competition. Likewise, they have some independent study and summer camp experience, and so this also fits into the fit for major. These types of activities by themselves, like a 1-week camp or an independent study that they've done for a few dozen hours, that in and of itself doesn't tell us a whole lot, but if the student chooses to talk about it in their essays, then that's one way to really bring some of the resume to life, because simply having something on your resume doesn't tell your reviewer all that much. It's really the context and journey and process that you've taken to get to some of these, points where you're receiving mentorship or applying for a camp, for example. So sometimes students ask, how can I improve my resume? Well, that's just one part of the question. It's not just the credentials and checking the boxes, but the overall journey and context that's involved. So they've got some work experience, and so it looks like they're a tutor both for the Kumon Reading Center and also privately. And again, they've mentioned the internship and independent study. They've got some programming here, so we're getting a picture of a well-rounded student who's demonstrating a high fit for their first choice major. Okay, this is pretty cool. They've got a variety of different extracurriculars, so it's not super common to see students who are playing a varsity sport or an AAU basketball, for example, at a high level, while also playing like piano for many years as well, and then even ranking in kind of very high up in a national piano competition. So that's pretty cool and relatively uncommon. So when reviewers are looking for students that are adding different perspectives to the classroom or to their program, this is something that sticks out to me as a reviewer. So we'll see if they tell us more about it in the essays. Got a few different clubs here and some more awards and achievements that correspond to what we've already seen at the beginning. They've also done looks like some independent study or college credit remotely through the Rochester Institute of Technology. And so, yeah, we have some nice volunteering, both domestically and abroad. So yeah, let's just jump down to the essays and see what they're sharing here. Because again, it's not just the resume, and especially for BHP, they're going to look for students who have an ability to communicate their desires and ambitions and can explain their journey from where they've come from. So let's track down to essay A here. So immediately they start with a nice visual and sharing an experience of landing at the airport, I believe in northern Vietnam, and talking about that experience. I think it's one of the, what I'm seeing here, one of the first times a student has left the United States. And so we get more about the background, how his father is Italian American, his mom's Vietnamese. So that provides more of the context to the ethnicity boxes that he checked on Apply Texas. Also, they're celebrating Tet, or the Lunar New Year, which is Tet, and that's also quite an interesting time to visit the country. Sharing a lot of visuals and illustrations to bring that experience to life in terms of what they were seeing and feeling and, smelling and tasting and touching. And so if you're that's one way to bring your stories to life, is to make it interesting for your reviewer to read. And so if at any point in this module you would like to pause the video so you can read a little more closely, I recommend doing so, because it can be hard to read this line by line, for example. But they've also done a couple of nice techniques where instead of just talking about cooking food with a local family, they talked about, their favorite dish and what that dish involves, especially for like myself who didn't know what this dish was before I read it. Also kind of making the connection between hearing Vietnamese spoken, for example, with their Vietnamese relatives in Houston or in the Vietnamese diaspora, and kind of how that triggers different emotions and memories whenever they're actually in Vietnam. And also demonstrating a level of empathy and maturity here by sharing a paragraph about his impressions of his mom's perspective and how she was kind of dealing with the experience of leaving as a refugee during the Vietnam War and kind of coming back for the first time, and then sharing that with her Texas family. And so your essay doesn't have to be 100% about yourself. And in fact, especially if you have reoccurring characters or people that are in your story, particularly here where if his mother wasn't Vietnamese, they probably wouldn't be in Vietnam. It's a wise strategy to talk a little bit more about that, and introducing more nuance here by talking about the differences between being in a large city like Hanoi versus the countryside with the more rural villages. And so we receive here a really thoughtful portrait of the students' experiences that ties into their broader conversations about their identity. And then they kind of bring everything back home and discuss how, these experiences in Vietnam help them consolidate their own sense of self, and, talking about having, diverse friends, or, even playing AAU basketball with students who come from a different background, racially and socioeconomically. And so I really like this essay because it's not just a type of, trip abroad where they are, doing some service mission because it's connected with their church, which is fine. But, this has a really personal and meaningful depth to why they've chosen this topic. And so I think it was a really nice choice of topic, and they've done an excellent job on expanding upon why it's important and keeping the reader engaged and entertained. And it's certainly an interesting one and would have been of interest to business honors reviewers. Let's go down to the major short answer. So we received some more context about the March Madness tournament and how they got started hosting the competition at their school. And so they're, it's pretty cool to make this intersection between, things you see on TV in a sport of basketball, and then, applying lessons learned from AP statistics, and, kind of getting a few other people together to make their own March Madness brackets, I think is pretty neat. And it's also relatable because a lot of his reviewers may themselves have March Madness brackets. So, when a reviewer is reading an application, it can sometimes, I always resonated closest when I was reviewing files with students who did similar things to me. And so, when I would read a file about a student who did speech and debate, or who had stopped playing a sport, for example, or had, experienced some sort of illness as a child, that would really stick out to me. And so there's obviously no way to know if your reviewer has done a March Madness bracket, but, here you can certainly see how the student is making their essays as relatable and personable as possible. We've got a nice conclusion here about how McCombs can help them achieve their future goals with some long-term ambitions to graduate school or pursuing a career after graduation. In their leadership short answer, there's a lot they probably could have talked about given how well-rounded and extensive their resume was, but they've chosen to discuss living with their older brother, or living with Nicholas at home, who has kind of a severe disability, quadriplegic cerebral palsy. And again, it's a demonstration of how the leadership short answer doesn't have to be a typical leadership position or something on the resume, but instead being a leader at home or in the family. And it sounds like, taking care of Nicholas is quite an intensive job that it's a full family effort. And so, yeah, so it's just a thoughtful essay here that could have itself been perhaps like an entire essay, but I think it's probably more appropriate for it to be this shorter leadership essay because, with the essay you want to keep it, 70 or 80% on, you as a student and your own journey. But here I think is a really nice choice of sharing this, important part of his identity and Nicholas, who's an important part of their family. And also kind of, a paragraph here at the bottom of introspection and self-awareness about how, having a family member who has a difficult life, reminds how lucky I am to have the opportunities in my life and encourages them to get out of their comfort zone. So it's a nice choice of topic and a good take on the discussion. And I think the diversity short answer too is also a really good approach because they are, if you recall, mixed Vietnamese and white Italian, and they're playing in AAU basketball, which is, a predominantly African American setting, especially playing at a high level. And so, I appreciate how he talks about coming from a different background. There were some earlier versions of this essay actually that talked about just directly being Asian American and playing basketball. But in the final version, it focused more on kind of, just meeting from friends from different backgrounds and just kind of having an awareness that some of the privileges in his life may not extend to people who are living in different parts of town. They've also, discussed their interest in music, which stood out on the resume as well. And so discussing how it's played a significant role in his life and how he's done it at quite a high level. And I don't think you would get to that high of a level if you're not intrinsically motivated to play an instrument. And so I think it's really neat that they're talking about their diversity of interests and the types of friend groups that they've established in high school. And so we receive a portrait of a student who you can imagine is, quick to make friends and not pigeonhole themselves into one friend group. And so when we talk about leadership and diversity on campus, certainly Christopher is the kind of student that UT and BHP would look for. So let's look at the Business Honors Program essay, where it asks students to discuss a piece of news and about the importance of a business education. I think they've chosen a cool topic here about the intersection between automation and machine learning with agricultural equipment, and how when we think about the future of technology and where we might be in 10 or 20 years, we're often imagining, flying cars, for example. But, it's really about these kind of hidden sectors or hidden from, people living in the city and suburbs, parts of the economy where, technology is revolutionizing all sorts of different industries and might change, fundamental ways that societies are organized. And so he spends the first half identifying the trend, and then the second half talks about the importance of a high quality business education, particularly with MIS, for example. But then, also a well-rounded or a nice conclusion here about how BHP can help him develop critical thinking abilities and skills to navigate an increasingly changing and rapidly changing and globalized world. And so I think it's a really nice topic here and a very strong application overall. And so let's take a look at the results. So I've already shared some of my thoughts about where they are at, and in particular, how from the beginning with the resume, we're seeing how a variety of different themes and dimensions of the student are being woven through the essay and the short answers along with BHP. It's also a good example of demonstrating leadership at home and how diversity, can mean a wide variety of things. In this case, it's the varied interests the students have, and also the friends that they've made from different activities, and not limiting themselves into one group or clique or the other. So I think it's just a really thoroughly nice application. I think it's certainly not a 1, 2, or 3. I think almost every reviewer is going to see their application as a 5. if particularly having the state level achievements and BPA, and then also playing piano at a high level. The essays, of course, are quite thoughtful. I think it's possible that some reviewers could see this application as a 6, particularly if some of the stories are resonating with their own personal experiences. I think their likely score was a 5.5. I think if I were reviewing this application, I would probably have given it a 5, depending on the day and my mood, which plays a role in your admissions review, whether you like it or not. I think it's possible they got a 5.5, that they got one reviewer was a 5 and one that was a 6. And the reason I think that is because they were admitted early to regular McCombs, and then they were admitted in the first wave of decision releases for BHP. They also received full rights to other universities as well. So really a nice admissions process and results for this particular student. And I believe they're choosing to enroll at BHP. And so they'll be a great addition and member to the class of 2024.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can find more helpful information at texadmissions.com/blog. And in the information section of this video, I provide links to a free online email consultation if you're interested in potentially working together, and links to my book, Your Ticket to the 40 Acres, and my premium course, Getting into Texas Universities. Thanks, and I hope to see you again soon.